Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Nemi George. I work for Vodafone within the global enterprise business, and really just here to tell you a story of how we've taken IDM from what most people consider identity management to being something that actually works for our business. So we've tailored what was an off-the-shelf solution to be a key part of our business and effectively the cornerstone in which our entire enterprise business is based on. To give you an idea of the scope, we manage about 1,800 customers globally across every industry you can think about, from the big banks to the big pharmaceuticals, defense, government, and so on. And then you throw into that mix the fact that we have shared service organizations in various parts of the world. So we have shared service organizations in India, Honduras, Cairo, Budapest, Romania. Different countries with different data protection and privacy requirements, and also various levels of technical knowledge in these areas. And so trying to build a solution that sits in the middle that allows all these people access to various different in-house and customer solutions became key as we tried to scale and yet automate the work that we do. So we manage millions of endpoints, and that's everything from traditional handsets to servers to web-based applications. I've talked about the sort of customers we have. As a global multi-vendor, multi-technology operation, it's 24/7, 450 plus support staff, various levels of skills, as I said, various levels of security clearance, and requiring access to a whole lot of internal data. So before we got onto the IDM journey, we had customer-specific runbooks. For those of you who have operations or have worked in operations, this is a very scary scenario for a lot of sysadmins. You know, you want to make a change at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have to go read up a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of documentation specific to a particular customer to understand how you do work for that particular account. We all know the problems with spreadsheets. Things get missed, data gets corrupt. And a lot of the solutions we manage were very vendor specific. So if we had to make a network change, someone logs onto a network box to manage network devices. As part of that same change process, you may need to do a web change or an application change. You log onto a different. You can just imagine the poor guy with his Red Bull at night, swiveling chairs from one system to the other. And obviously that introduces a lot of human error. So after implementing it, we now have a system where we can base access based on not just the role, but based on a level of experience. We can do it based on a level of trust. So if you imagine I'll pick India being out of the EU, for instance, I may need a colleague in India to perform a change, but I don't want him to have any access to or know what system is actually changing. So I can script all the way down to the guy waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and running a script. He doesn't know what the script is. He doesn't know what the system he's trying to access is. It's all pre-packaged, and he simply rolls it out. And there'll be verifications afterwards to prove if that change was successful or not. And the one thing it also gives us, and I think this is maybe the biggest trend I've seen over the last 3 years, and that is the rise of compliance. Customers are now increasingly aware of all the different rules they need to comply with. So customers are now telling us, we need to have ISO 27001, we need to comply to data protection requirements within our region, and so I need you to prove to me that the work you guys do on our behalf complies to those requirements as well. So we need a system that is able to give us that. And I've talked about the automation work that we do. So this just tries to illustrate what happens today with privileged access management and how that is exploited. A malicious attacker, whether that is an insider or an external user, gets into your system, has some form of malware installed on your system. How that is installed, we all know there are a myriad of ways that's done. Once they're able to get access to privileged credentials within your network, they then start escalating those privileges, they start farming your data, and then they start looking at bits within the system that they're able to exploit. So if you work in the bank, they obviously would try to get to credit card information. And it's really surprising how naive a lot of companies are when it comes to identity management. The amount of times you see passwords named passwords.txt, or you have Excel files that just give away the fact that they're holding very confidential information. And this just gives an illustration today. This is based on the 2014 Verizon report. You still have, by far and away, the largest amount of compromised passwords by passwords simply being stolen. A lot of this is down to user behavior. And the approach we've taken within Vodafone is to go away from just people. I worked in incident management a while ago, and I kind of got tired of writing the same thing in all of my post-incident reports. We're going to retrain the user, we're going to re-educate the user, we're going to, slap in the wrist, and then shove them up to the shop floor all over again, and cross the fingers and hope it doesn't happen. And we need to now start looking at how we automate and put in systems that reduce the possibility of human error, and hopefully reduce that number of the amount of privileged access rights that are being stolen. You have currently 4%. That's dropped in this year's survey to 3%, and 10% of access rights being phished. That's increased. A slight drop. We can't tell whether that's going to be a sustainable trend, but it does seem that they're going that way. So, privileged accounts. We've talked a lot about identity management. When you go from being able to manage identity for one individual to manage an identity for, say, a sysadmin, obviously very different. The sysadmin almost has godlike rights. He can do whatever he wants to do. And in a lot of cases, is able to clean up his tracks afterwards. And so that's what we are really looking at managing. This is actually a true depiction of my environment. We've obviously taken out usernames and the profiles, but in the actual report, what you have is all of the users on my system. So the majority of those 450 users to your right against all of the systems that they have access to your left. And it's really interesting when you watch the actual video, and it shows how many different profiles map to different people to do different things. And the truth is, if you operate a company the size of Vodafone and the scale of our managed service operation, it's simply impossible, especially with the need to make sure the passwords are increasingly complex. So what did we do? Simply put, we decided to implement a system that allowed a trusted and a secure relationship based on your user profile and your identity. So you have an identity as a user, and then you have various profiles that allow you to execute different tasks on different systems. And your passwords, your credentials are known to you. The credentials of the system you are trying to access are never ever known to you, never disclosed to you. That's all managed at effectively a machine-to-machine layer with the devices. And based on the things I mentioned earlier, your level of experience, your clearance level if needed, and also what role you perform, we're then able to map the identity you have to the role and the profile that we expect you to perform. So the first stage is everyone has an identity, a single identity. So you are who you are, we can always identify that. but then the roles that you perform may well change depending on the system or the task that you have to do. The second stage was then going beyond traditional access management into prepackaged tasks. So, as I said, an example of, let's take a practical example of changing a password. If you want to change a password, very, very basic task that anyone can do. But you may need system admin rights to do that. So if you think about a level 1 engineer in an organization who now has sys-level access, who can do anything in the system, but in effect, you're only expecting him to change a password. So you have privileges being overly escalated and overprivileged to do very basic tasks. This eliminates that problem to the business. And then the third is who's done what and when. So for those of us in industries that are heavily regulated, you want to be able to prove all of these things to your internal auditors, maybe to your customers, and so on. So we operate a proxy service in effect. So you have a local client proxy that authenticates you to your local device, and then you have the system proxy effectively that then authenticates you based on your identity onto the remote system. These two proxies create a virtual air gap between the user and the secure systems. There is no connectivity between the both of them. So if you were to install a keylogger, for instance, on my remote system, you will not be able to get any keys because I'm not entering any details to the remote system that I'm logging onto. The proxy service then injects these privileged credentials based on the profile definitions that we have talked about. So you never know what accounts, you never know what passwords you're using. You can't record them, cannot be cached. Passwords never enter the workstation's domain, so there's nothing local that can be hashed, RAM-scraped, or keylogged. And this is an illustration of what I've talked about. So the first stage of having all of the various ways you can gain access, and then you have your host systems, but then you have the air gap between them. The other thing that we insisted on doing early on was keeping this simple. So you can use all of the existing tools you use today. A lot of the solutions out there in the market expect you to use a web browser or a URL to do certain things. With this is native. So you run a small proxy in your system, and you use all of the system tools that you use within your business today. None of that changes. And going back to the kill chain diagram I showed before, the bits in the middle where you escalate privileges, well, that's gone. Because if you can't see the destination, then there's no way you can escalate any or farm with the data that you have harvested from many of the systems. We also talked about projecting tasks, and so you have the other thing I haven't mentioned actually is worth talking about that. If you work in a more controlled environment where you expect people to, say, make changes during a fixed change window, then you can allow that through the system. So you can say, you cannot reboot a system, or you can only reboot the system between, say, 12 midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning, because that's my change window. And you can automate all of those tasks based on your core business requirements. Coming back to our business, so over the past 3 years we've had the solution in. We have been able to carry out 2.5 million tasks in 3 years. Now, if you think about the volume of that, that's over 2.5 million times that a sysadmin user has logged into an internal, a customer system without knowing the passwords to that system. 2.5 million times where you have potentially reduced the risk to your business and to the customer. This just shows the analytics that I talked about. So you have various, the sort of top left, you have a management summary. You can also do things like shadowing sessions. So if you had maybe for investigative purposes or even for training purposes. You can have someone shadow an entire session from a different country, see what someone else is doing, learn from that, and obviously for all the various customer reports, if you are in my sort of business, but indeed any business, everyone likes to see lots and lots of reports. So you get all of that information made available to you. And just to summarize, I think identity management, especially from all the speakers today, the one thing that I guess most of us can take away is IDM solutions can be anything you want them to be. But you've got to, my advice is to stop thinking about the product in front of you and start looking more at your business. A simple single sign-on solution that logs into various URLs may be perfectly ideal for the sort of business you do. Having something that transcends IDM into automation, into scripting, into change management, having the change window blocks may be more suited to your business. So it should be relevant and tailored to your operation. Can be very complex, time-consuming, and suffer from scope creep. The scope creep bit is quite interesting because when we had the solution offered to us, it was actually presented to us as a network management solution to manage your network devices. And at the time, we had no business requirement for that because we used Cisco ACS, and that worked perfectly well for us. However, we were just, at the time, looking to grow our business in India. And our biggest concern was granting a lot of this privileged access to people a couple thousand miles away and not knowing what was actually going on without having to scrub through pages and pages of syslogs and event logs. So we were able to work with the vendor to effectively rebuild the solution and tailor it to our exact business requirements. Out-of-the-box commercial off-the-shelf solutions are not always the best choice, although there are very good products out there. And again, I come back to the scope. Ensure you're covering all access routes. A lot of times when I've spoken to people who do IDM, they go for the low-hanging fruit. And within security, that is a phrase that I just can't stand. Because low-hanging fruit, that's great, but then, you know, people just reach a little bit higher and go beyond the scope of what you've implemented. So you need to look at the breadth of your operation. You know, a lot of time and effort goes into implementing IDM solutions. If you're going to spend that time, you might as well do it right and do it once and for all. And I think the final thing I'll say is the vendor I'm talking about is not a sales pitch, but they're out there in the foyer, so you can speak to them, and I'm sure they will be more than happy to explain the solution in detail to you. Thank you very much.